people, and people have their faults. But in terms of a benign country, you will not find a more benign country than this one. And this country reached the pinnacle faster than any other nation and has not used that pinnacle status to dominate others. And that is something that is very special. And if we lose our pinnacle status and it is gained by someone else, everybody here has not really known what domination is, but you'll see it again. Because if the Russians or the Chinese or the jihadists become the dominant power, you're going to see a very different world order going on than what you see right now. And that's why it is so important that we stop and take stock of who we are as Americans, not give up and capitulate and just say this is inevitable, this is what's going to happen. It is not inevitable. It's only inevitable if we do not get involved. Now, when people say that this is not a great country, why is it that there's so many people trying to get in here? and why is it that nobody's trying to escape? You know, I mean, when you stop and think about it, that kind of belies that whole narrative. And certainly for me, it was a land of dreams. You know, I can remember, you know, as a youngster, one of the things that I hated so much was poverty. You know, some people hate snakes and some people hate scorpions and rats. I hated poverty. There was never money for anything. I mean, sometimes we would get these free coupons so that we could get into the state fair. And we were so excited we were going to the fair. But we could never ride any of the rides. Could never get any popcorn. I never tasted cotton candy until I was an adult. And it wasn't all that good. But, you know, everything looks great when you can't have it. And, but, you know, you just had to live vicariously, you know, by watching other people have fun. But I'll tell you what turned that around for me. It was my mother. Now, if anybody should have felt like a victim, it was my mother. You know, one of 24 children. Got married at age 13 after being shuffled from place to place to place, never having a place to really call home. Cobbling together no better than a third grade education during that time, and trying to escape a desperate situation in rural Tennessee. And they moved to Detroit, where, you know, my father got a job in a factory, but years later, she discovered that he was a bigamist. And of course that resulted in a divorce. I remember telling that story at a graduation at the University of Utah. Nobody thought it was that strange. Just kidding. But, you know, she absolutely refused to be a victim. And she always thought that there was something that you could do yourself. And she never made excuses for herself. She never felt sorry for herself, which was a good thing. The problem is she never felt sorry for us either. So there was never any excuse that was adequate. But I really think in retrospect that that was the most important thing she did, to teach us not to be excuse makers, not to look for somebody else to blame, always to take the responsibility upon yourself, because that's the way you find solutions. You won't find solutions as long as you can blame somebody else. You can wallow in an excuse, then you can just sit back and relax. And that made a huge difference throughout my medical career also. And that's why, you know, I would get things done that maybe other people hadn't gotten done before. It makes a difference. But the other key thing that she did is she made us read books. And we didn't want to read books. I mean, she came in one day after praying to God for wisdom and said, turn off the TV, which we thought was You know, today we probably would have called protective services. But back in those days, you know, you had to do what your parents told you. There was no social psychologist saying let the kid express himself. So, you know, we turned the TV off, and then she said we had to read 2 books apiece from the Detroit Public Libraries every single week and submit to her written book reports, which she couldn't read, but we didn't know that, you know. And she would put little check marks and highlights and act like she was reading them, but she wasn't. And, you know, I wasn't happy in the beginning, but something changed. Because as I started reading about people of accomplishment, it changed my thinking. I remember one of the first books I read was the autobiography of Booker T. Washington. It was called Up From Slavery. You know, it was illegal for slaves to read or be educated. And he taught himself to read every book he could get his hands on, became an advisor to 2 presidents. And that said a lot to me, that it wasn't where you started, it was where you finished, and you were the one who had the most to do with that. And I started reading about all kinds of people, scientists and explorers, people of enormous accomplishment. And I began to understand, as I read their stories, that the person who has the most to do with what happens to you in life is you. It's not somebody else. It really doesn't matter what anybody else says or does if you have the right attitude. And, you know, if you take somebody who has the right attitude, and let's say they're a very successful businessman, and you take everything from them, and they're homeless on the street, guess where they'll be in another year or 2? Right back up there. And if you take somebody who has the wrong attitude, who's a bum on the street, and you dust them off and give him a 3-piece suit and a nice job and give him a title, guess where he's going to be? Back on the street. You know, it's really the matter of your attitude and what you're willing to do more than anything else. And when I began to understand that, guess what? Poverty didn't bother me anymore, because I knew it was only temporary. I knew that I had the ability to change it, that I had the ability to have whatever kind of life that I wanted. It was only going to require that I made the choices and I decided to put the energy behind those choices. And that is what's known as the can-do attitude. And that is what characterized the rapid rise of America from nowhere to the pinnacle of the world much faster than anybody else in the history of the world, and to a higher pinnacle than anyone else had ever risen. Now we're in the process of decline. But I don't think that we have to inevitably go to the bottom. I think we can stop it, and we can reverse course, and we can start going back up again. But we have to be wise enough to recognize what were the factors that made us prosperous in the first place. And it was the fact that we were willing to work hard. It was the fact that we had a government that understood the purpose of government. Purpose of government is to provide for the common defense, to make sure that people don't injure each other, to make sure that people can get around, you know, roads and things of that nature, but not to insinuate itself into every aspect of our lives and to try to control everything that we do. That's the problem. So, you know, our founders said there would be no necessity for government or regulations if men were angels. But we know men are not angels, nor are women. Just in case there are any Hillarys, of course. But the fact of the matter is, we do need a certain level of regulatory control, but nothing like what's going on now. And, you know, this country had a very powerful economic engine. And that was the thing that drove us so quickly to the pinnacle of the world. And now that engine cannot rev up again because there's so many regulations. And what most people don't recognize is that every single regulation costs you money in terms of goods and services. It taxes money onto the cost. I remember, you know, when Dodd-Frank first came out, and, you know, I was on the board of Kellogg, on the board of Costco, and we were sitting there going over all these new regulations and what we had to do and how many lawyers and other people were going to have to be hired in order to comply with those things. Guess what happens with all that cost? It gets passed on to the consumer. So every single regulation costs you money. And who does that most adversely affect? Poor people and the middle class. And those are the ones who are being hit the hardest by all of this regulatory reform. And the people who are putting all these tons of regulations are the very ones sitting around saying, it's those rich people over there, that's why you're having problems. No, it's because of all these silly regulations that are going on. That's what's causing us our problem. And as they're driving our debt up, that is also causing us a big problem. The national debt right now, $18.5 trillion. Now we can say that, but can you really comprehend what that means? $18 trillion? It's ridiculous. I mean, if you try to pay that back at a rate of $10 million a day, every day of the week, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, it would take you more than 5,000 years to pay that back. And that is what we are putting on the backs of our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. They will have no quality of life. But you know what? That's the good news, because it's much worse than that. There's something known as the fiscal gap. Please look that up when you go home. Fiscal gap. That is the amount of unfunded liabilities. What the government owes, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, government programs versus the income expected to come in from taxes and other revenue sources. Those numbers should be virtually identical, and when they're not, there's a gap if you bring it forward to today's dollars. That gap right now sits at $211 trillion. That is an incomprehensible number. You cannot even imagine what that means and how long it would take to pay that back. The only reason that we can do it is because we can print money. We're known as the reserve currency of the world. That's a status that goes with the world's #1 economy, which we were from the 1870s until last year when China became the world's #1 economy. Now, would they like to be able to print money? Would they like to be the reserve currency? Of course they would. But their financial infrastructure won't tolerate it right now. But they're working on it. And we have a grace period. But I don't think that our grace period should be looking at how do we prevent them from becoming the reserve currency. Our grace period should be used to drive down our debt and to rev up that economic engine and once again become the #1 economic power. We should not capitulate to them. This is America. We are Americans. We are the people with the can-do attitude. we can do virtually anything that anybody else can do, except we can do it better, because that's who we are. And we are a conglomerate of the entire world. You look at America, it's the whole spectrum, which means we have the benefits from every society that has ever existed right here. All we have to do is have the correct vision. The Bible says in Proverbs 29:18, without a vision, the people perish. We once again have to develop the vision, and we have to stop giving away the values and principles that made us great for the sake of political correctness. Political correctness. It is in the process of destroying who we are and destroying our future. And I got to tell you something. There is something special about America. There is such a thing as the American way. We all know what that means. Is there a French way? Is there a Portuguese way? Is there a Brazilian way? No, there's only an American way. And there are such things as un-American things. Are there un-Canadian things? Or un-Italian things? No. There is something very unique and very special about our country. We must grasp that so that we understand that those people who are out there trying to drive wedges between us, the American people, they are not our friends. They are our enemies. The ones who are proclaiming the war on women and race wars and income wars and age wars and religious wars, they are not our friends. We have got to begin to recognize them. And what we have to do, I'm not saying that we all have to believe exactly the same thing, but we have to recognize that because someone doesn't believe what you believe, it doesn't make them your enemy. And what we have to do is be mature enough to actually sit down and reason with each other and put what you believe on the table and let your neighbor put what they believe on the table and talk about it. You will frequently find that you're not nearly as far apart as you think you are, and you'll find that you agree on a lot more than you disagree on. And I always say if two people agree about everything, one of them isn't necessary. So, and I think everybody is necessary. So let's learn how to get along. You know, you'll notice when you go online and you look at an article and you get to the comment section, you usually can't get more than 5 comments down before somebody's saying, this is an idiot. And they're calling each other names and acting like 3rd graders. You know, come on. We can do much better than this. You know, we're smarter people than that. But back to this economic situation, and I'm going to close in a minute and open it up for questions. You know, this the reason that we can sustain that is because we can print money, and we continue to drive that debt. Because the debt is so high, the Fed has to suppress the interest rates, because the debt service, if you had a higher interest rate, would just be astronomical and we wouldn't be able to pay it. So we're sort of in a catch-22 situation, and unless we can drive our national debt down, which will then allow us to be able to raise the interest rates and be able to afford to do that, then we remain in this stagnant situation. Because you see, the middle class and the lower economic classes, they no longer have any mechanism for making money. They used to be able to put it into a savings account and at 4 or 5 or 6%, watch it grow over 30 or 40 years and retire with a nice nest egg. That's gone. And that is very problematic, because not only are people not saving, But see, banks have no incentive to loan average Joe money to start a business because they're not making anything on it. So everything is directed toward the big multinational corporations and things of that nature. These are things that are antithetical to the well-being of the middle class and those trying to make it into the middle class. You'll never hear that from the Hillary Clintons or the Bernie Sanders of the world. They will not tell you the truth on that. They will try to make it seem like somebody else's fault. They'll talk about the 1%. The fact of the matter is you can take every penny from the 1% and you can apply it to those problems that I just talked about and it'll do nothing. That is not the cause. But you can drive it a lot faster if you're saying to everybody, we want you to get on welfare. We want you to take food stamps. We want you to have, a free telephone. We want you to have free tuition to college. That will destabilize us much faster when we're already in a precarious situation. It is vital that everybody here understands that, because that's the only way you can interpret what you're hearing. And it's important that you talk to the people in your sphere of influence. Talk to your uncle who hasn't voted in 20 years and just sits around sipping beer. Make sure he understands. He understands that when he doesn't vote, he is voting. And he is voting for what will eventually bankrupt the country, and he will have no beer to sip. So, you have to put everything into perspective for people at their level. But talk to your neighbors, your co-workers, your extended family. Make sure that they understand that the only way that we can remain a free and prosperous nation is if we all get involved. We must all be informed, and we must recognize that freedom is not free. We have to pay for it. We have to be involved. Every single one of us is what will allow America to be one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all very much.